Hi everyone. In this talk, I'll be presenting our paper, Parallel Particle Advection Bake-Off for Scientific Visualization Workloads. This is the outline for my talk, and I'll start by giving an overview of the paper. This paper is presenting an empirical study that compares different parallel particle advection algorithms to get an understanding of how these algorithms perform relative to each other on various workloads. The study answers three questions: which parallelization algorithm performs best for a given workload, and why does a parallelization algorithm perform best for a given workload, and finally, what are the unsolved problems in parallel particle advection. I'll give a brief overview of what particle advection is. Advection is the process of displacing a massless particle along a flow from the seed location to the final location in advection steps, which result in an integral curve that represents the trajectory of the particle. Particle advection is the foundation of many flow visualization techniques. Two of these techniques are FTLE and stream surfaces. In FTLE, which is presented in the left, it's a technique to study transparent behaviors in unsteady flow, while stream surfaces, which is presented on the right, it's a union of streamlines connected to form a surface. Different flow visualization techniques have different workloads. For example, in streamlines, there are usually tens of particles, each one of them advects for a long duration. While in stream surfaces, there are usually thousands of particles that advect for medium duration. And in FTLE, there are usually billions of particles that advect for short duration. These are just three examples, and there are more variant workloads from other flow visualization techniques. So we can see here that there are usually billions or trillions of steps to compute. So how do we do this? We use parallelization and take advantage of the additional resources to do such heavy computation. Now, if the data is small, then parallelization is easy. We can duplicate the data on all the nodes and distribute particles across nodes, and each node will do its computation. But if the data is large, this becomes more challenging, since we have a lot of computation and the data is large, which means it's split across multiple nodes. So we need to make sure that we have the correct particle and the correct data block on the same node at the same time to be able to compute one advection step. There are two main algorithms to do parallel particle advection: either parallelize over data or parallelize over particles. Other solutions have been proposed either as an extension of one of these two algorithms or as a hybrid of the two. So how do these main algorithms work? The first algorithm is parallelize over data, and in this algorithm, we distribute the data between different nodes, and each node advects the particles located in its data block. For example, node 2 is responsible for the particles that are located in the green block only. And once a particle leaves that data block, it is communicated to the node responsible for the new block. The second main algorithm is parallelize over particles. In this algorithm, the seeds are distributed equally between the different nodes, and each node advects particles and load data blocks as needed. For example, node 2 here is responsible for advecting these particles regardless of their data block. The reason there are multiple parallel particle advection solutions is because particle advection performance varies depending on the workload. And the workload is defined by different factors, such as the number of particles, the seeding box, the duration of each particle, and so on. And different parallel algorithms behave differently for each workload. For example, in this workload, we have a density distribution where all particles are located in one data block. If we use parallelize over data algorithm here, this will lead to load imbalance. And the reason is because there is one node that's doing all the advection while other nodes are idle. In the second example, the workload here has a circular field, and we see that we have 4 data blocks. Let's say, for example, that the cache can only hold 2 data blocks. Using the parallelize over particle algorithm here will result in high I/O. And that's because the algorithm will keep accessing the disk to load the same blocks more than once, since it only can carry 2 data, since the cache can only carry 2 data blocks. The motivation behind this study is that there are many parallel particle advection algorithms, but there is no comprehensive study that identifies the best algorithm for a specific workload. In this paper, we evaluate and compare 4 of the most used parallel particle advection algorithms on different workloads. We do this by answering 3 questions. The first one is, which parallelization algorithm performs best for a given workload? The second one is, why does a parallelization algorithm perform best for a given workload? And finally, what are the unsolved problems in parallel particle advection? Are there any workloads that are difficult to balance using the existing parallelization algorithms? The 4 algorithms that we consider are parallelize over data, parallelize over particles, work requesting, which is an extension of parallelize over particle, the master worker algorithm, which is a hybrid of parallelize over data and parallelize over particle. For each one of these algorithms, we made improvements and chose the best practices from previous solutions. We added on-node parallelism using the VTKM library, which allows us to have efficient implementations on different architectures without rewriting the code. We also improved the work requesting algorithm for parallel particle advection by using an improved scheduling method called the lifeline scheduling method. We adapted the setting presented by Camp and his colleague to use extended memory hierarchy for algorithms that load data on demand. And we took into account the differences between the data size and hardware differences between our study and their study. These are the abbreviations we use for the algorithms. POD is the parallelize over data algorithm. POP is the parallelize over particles algorithm. LSM is the work requesting algorithm using the lifeline scheduling method. MW is the master worker algorithm. For our experiment, there are 3 main axes that we consider: total number of advection steps, concurrency, and the seeding box size. The total number of advection steps is computed by multiplying the number of particles by the advection steps of each particle. We consider 3 options for the number of particles and 2 for the advection steps per particle, which will result in 6 options. We consider 3 concurrencies, and for each concurrency, we increase the number of nodes, the size of the data, and the number of particles. So we are performing a weak scaling study. Our third axis is the seeding box size. The seeding box size determines where the initial seeds are placed. In this study, we consider 3 options: large seeding box, which covers the entire domain; medium, which covers a portion of the domain; small box, which covers even a smaller portion of the domain. In total, we have 54 configuration, and we ran 216 experiments. For our dataset, we use the fish tank dataset, which is a simulation of twin inlets that pump water of different temperatures into a box, and the vector field captures the fluid flow within the box. We ran our experiments on Cori, which is a NERSC machine, where each node has 2 sockets and each socket has a 16-core Hasel processor. For our performance measurement, we measure the speed of the algorithm processing by defining a variable we call SPRPS, which is the number of steps computed per rank per second. And we computed by dividing the execution time over the total advection steps multiplied by the number of ranks. Here are some of the results from our paper. I'll start first by explaining how to read the figure. The x-axis is showing different concurrencies, and for each concurrency, the leftmost run is the smallest workload and the rightmost run is the largest workload. The y-axis here is representing performance in SPRPS, which is the number of steps computed per rank per second. And we should notice here that the higher the y is, the better. For the large seeding box, workload pod has the best performance of all algorithms, and MW has the worst performance of all algorithms, since the algorithm has a lot of idle time where workers are waiting for the master instructions. The performance of the algorithms from best to worst is as the following: pod, LSM, POP, and then MW. For the mid-seeding box, LSM has the best performance of all algorithms, and pod has the worst performance of all algorithms. And that's because the algorithms suffer from load imbalance. This is because in this algorithm, each node only advects the particles located in its data block. And when the seeding box doesn't cover the entire domain, there are some nodes that are idle, while other nodes are doing a lot of computation. The performance of the algorithms from best to worst is as the following: LSM, POP, MW, and then pod. For the small seeding box, the behavior is very similar to the previous workload, where LSM has the best performance of all algorithms, and pod has the worst performance of all the algorithms because of the load imbalance. And as the seeding box gets smaller, the load imbalance increases between different nodes. The performance of the algorithms from best to worst is LSM, POP, MW, and then pod. This figure shows the 3 workloads presented together, and from this figure there are 3 observations that we can see. The first one is all algorithms perform poorly for the smallest workload, since there isn't enough work to offset the cost of I/O. The second observation is that the negative impact of load imbalance is higher than the impact of high I/O costs. Finally, the third observation is that for all algorithms, the performance drops at scale for one of 3 reasons. The first reason is for the additional I/O operations, which impact LSM, POP, and MW. The second reason is for the additional communication, which impact pod, LSM, and MW. And finally, the third reason is the increase in load imbalance, which impact pod. To conclude my talk, our study compared 4 of the most used parallel particle advection algorithms by answering 3 questions. The first one is, which parallelization algorithm performs best for a given workload? From our study, we found that the size of the seeding box is a major factor. For the large box, we found that pod has the best performance. For the mid and small box, we found that LSM has the best performance. The second question is, why does a parallelization algorithm perform best for a given workload? I'll start first by explaining how to read this figure. We see in this figure that there are 3 different groups. Each group is representing a concurrency. Each column shows the portion of the execution time spent doing each one of these tasks. Each 2 adjacent columns show the time for the rank with the least amount of work and the rank with the most amount of work for one of the parallel algorithms. So for example, these 2 columns show the behavior of pod. For the large box workload, the pod algorithm has the best performance because it has the least I/O cost from all other algorithms, which is shown here in the dark blue. This is because in pod, each node is responsible for a specific number of blocks. For the mid box, the best algorithm is LSM because the algorithm maintains load balance since the particles are distributed equally, and work requesting make sure that the balance is maintained during runtime. Also, as the seeding box gets smaller, the cost of I/O gets smaller. For the small box, the behavior is similar to the previous workload, where LSM has the best performance because it maintains load balance and the I/O cost here gets even smaller. Finally, our third question is, what are unsolved problems in parallel particle advection, and are there any workloads that are difficult to balance using the existing parallelization algorithms? We noticed that the scalability is acceptable, but it's not excellent. When we increase the concurrency from 16 to 1024, which is an increase of a factor of 64, we see that the execution time goes up by a factor of 2, or sometimes up to a factor of 4, depending on the workload. And since we are doing weak scaling here, the execution time should be constant. The second problem is that the efficiency is much lower for small workloads since there isn't enough advection work to offset the cost of I/O. For future work, we would like to develop a meta algorithm that adapts its behavior depending on the workload. We would also like to study methods that can improve the scalability, such as pre-processing or acceleration strategies. Finally, since our current study was constrained by the limitation of compute hours, we would like to consider different machines and different data sets in the future. I would like to thank all the funding resources that funded this project, and I would also like to thank my co-authors. Thank you.